Welcome. So we're today at Skyway. This is the community that you co-founded, and I've been a resident here for a bit. And yeah, I just wanted to get on a video the how it is here and how communities are amazing and bring all this knowledge to the world. So I wanted to have a small review. Yeah, I want to start with what is your role in Skyway?
In Skyway, I'm one of the co-founders, and I'm holding the financial piece of purchasing this house and being willing to invest in some upgrades. And in a way, I also have a certain form of veto power over many aspects of life here, but I intentionally delegated to the community governance some aspects of life. So there's kind of like a division. The things that are more like pertinent to the property and to finances, like I have most say over. Um, but I wanted the community to more organically like live and develop some governance on its own also.
Yeah. So when you say veto power, it's there are some things related to the money or to the house where you can say, well, it is like this because this is always one.
Yeah.
And how do you relate to that? How does it feel for you?
Um, when I imagined doing this project, it felt kind of vulnerable to be financial daddy, so to speak, of the house. I'm not like super comfortable with taking responsibility for a lot of humans, like well-being or social dynamic. Um, but fortunately, I didn't really have to take a huge responsibility on that, as my other co-founders, Alton and Michaela, basically like took on the responsibility for being the social aspects of the house. Um, but over time, it's felt mixed. Like I like that when I make an investment in the house and it's appreciated and it facilitates the life here, that feels good. And also, this house has been very difficult to maintain and it's had a lot of challenges that have taken way more money than I imagined when starting. So that's been stressful. And um, it is one of the reasons I decided to end the community in a month or so.
Um, So hearing all this, it makes me curious. Like, how did the project started in your head, and was it planned that Michaela, Alton, and you would have like these specific roles, or is it something that came organically? Um, was it your idea at first, or was it like you guys meeting and then being like, oh, we should create a community together?
Um, yeah, I had been wanting to create a community in Puerto Rico, but I had started in Rincon on the West Coast and bought a house out there, and then COVID hit not too long later. And so that was in the way of starting a community in 2020 and early 2021. Then Alton reached out at some point in early 2021 and just said he's here. I had known him in the past from the Bay Area, and he expressed interest in community living. And I said, I'm interested in community living too, and been wanting to make it happen. And also became unsure that I still wanted to try to do it on the West Coast. I was feeling more pull to San Juan. So I'd say it was kind of both of our ideas. I think Alton had a little more of like the execution energy that like helped me take it from just an idea to something we were taking action on. Um, and then it ended up that I was out here for a different reason in San Juan visiting and happened to look at houses available, happened to see this beautiful mansion, toured it, with Alton and loved it immediately and felt like it was perfect for a community house. So we kind of made a quick and a little bit impulsive decision to just, I made a decision to buy it. And then shortly after that, I left for Bali for 6 months. So really it was like Alton and Michaela who got things running here and had to deal with a lot of house issues, troubleshooting.
Mm. You bought it and you left for Bali.
Yeah, it was a bit weird, but I had planned that trip for a long time, and I really wanted to go. I wanted to escape COVID restrictions, and also I wanted to take my partner to Bali. Um, so I wasn't willing to budge on that.
Were there some things that you discovered there that you brought back here?
Um, Question. I did bring back my dancing Shiva that's resting on top of the stove ventilation area. But I think you mean culturally. I didn't live in community in Bali, like in a community house. Um, Not obvious to me that I brought anything specific back from Bali. Maybe a little bit of a reinvigoration of the joy of ecstatic dance, which we hosted some ecstatic dances here in our courtyard after. Yeah.
And yeah, there is one question that just came to me now is did you actively work on connecting to San Juan and to this neighborhood and networking with the area?
Hmm. Um, I don't think I did much of that. I left most of the networking to yeah, people who love it, which would be Alton and I think Michaela also to a degree. Um, I was always imagining our community would recruit more from outside of Puerto Rico, um, more people from San Francisco and nomads who travel, because I had tried somewhat in earlier years to find conscious community or people who wanted to live in conscious community here, and I just didn't find good matches. I found people who were like pretty hippie and like into like back to the land living. That wasn't at all what I wanted. So I didn't feel a match there. But that was kind of it. I didn't find a lot of intersection with like tech or like entrepreneurship and conscious co-living. Um, so no, I didn't. I kind of gave up looking in Puerto Rico for housemates, but we did end up having Puerto Rican housemates. Not
Yeah.
not so much through my efforts, but other people.
Yeah, I mean, from what I see here, there's a relationship to the future, and there's something that Skyway brings to this neighborhood that is definitely going to be missed.
Yeah, I mean, we've put on a lot of events, and the events are generally or frequently open to public participation. And I think word has gotten around in the local community that these type of connection events and consciousness development events are happening here, and people have shown up. People have been interested from the local community, so it's become more of a local community kind of nexus than I originally imagined, which I think is great.
Yeah. Um, yeah, there is one thing I want to ask in case anyone who would be watching us doesn't really know. What is actually a conscious event, a conscious community? Like, conscious?
Yeah, I
Why
mean,
do you have interest also in this?
I imagine there's like pretty different definitions of that. For me, what I mean by it is like people who are interested in developing their consciousness, which like I like to just break it down into three simple lines of development, which is like waking up, growing up, and cleaning up. The waking up is like transcendence of identification with the ego and its structures and conditioning. Um, Growing up is like a maturation of worldview of like self in the world and in the universe. Um, like kind of integral theory and spiral dynamics kind of describe two such kind of maps of the growing up. And cleaning up is generally phrased as like doing trauma work, work on past conditioning to help resolve and liberate from the past conditioning, and uh,
And it sounds like taking responsibility. You know, that's what I imagine when I hear.
I think yeah, you need to take responsibility for your trauma and your conditioning to be effective at cleaning it up. I think, uh, but yeah, and then for like so that's what I describe as like consciousness development. But then for like conscious community, it's like bringing together people who are interested in conscious development. I just say conscious. I really mean consciousness, but to say it's like a consciousness community, it doesn't sound so smooth. It's like a bit of a bulky phrase. So we typically just say conscious community. But I really like consciousness because conscious could mean a million things from like environmentalism to like uh, be just being a responsible human to all types. And we have some of those values, but it's just that's not like the core cultural seed that I wanted to plant in consciousness.
Yeah, and there's something about doing this together as a community.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our say stuck points or limitations in our consciousness development are interpersonal. They're not something that is very efficiently addressed by going off into a cave and meditating a lot. Actually, more you kind of need stuff to be brought up, like triggers to come up to surface in order to like work with them and work into their depths. And living in community can be typically is a good way for that to happen, and especially when there's like support. When we all recognize we're all on like a healing and growth path together, and we can bring our unique perspectives and our unique lenses and our unique trajectories of our consciousness development and tools also, and it creates like a great cross pollination. So it's like enriching to learn about how others approach their consciousness development, but it's also like supportive to have camaraderie, like solidarity and friendship, and like I'd even say partnership uh, along the road. And so the community helps in all those ways.
I notice when I hear you speak that I really resonate with what you say. And then there's another part of me that is thinking of the people meditating in a cave and imagining they would maybe get triggered by this.
They should meditate more than work through the trigger. Probably maybe in a cave because they do get triggered by such things and they retreated to a cave. But I don't mean to be condescending about people in the cave. I think that to me that's like usually taking a very direct and all-in approach on the waking up part, that trajectory, like ego transcendence. And I have a lot of respect for that. I actually feel I felt drawn myself to like take really long retreat. I haven't yet, but I relate to the desire, and I think sometimes those people are willing to come out of their cave for a little bit and teach us many important things.
Yeah, I was gonna
It's
say
valuable.
for me, my personal journey, it was like a little bit of both. Like I had long periods where I was alone and I needed that, and then some periods where I was full. And this year, I started my year with this question: what is reality? Who creates reality? Create reality altogether, or is reality like imposed upon me? And there was this sentence of we exist only in relation to one another. And this is also where I felt really ready to dove into community. And yeah, like it's just a different step, I imagine. And I also want to hear more about your journey with consciousness.
Sure. I'll try to give a synopsis, and if you want to go deeper on any part, you can pause me. Um,
We'll double click on words.
Double click, yeah. Um, I started meditating when I had a burnout in graduate school. I had a physical symptom which showed up as like inflammation in my hands, a lot of pain, and I like couldn't use the computer anymore. And I tried a few months, maybe 3 months of standard Western medical prescriptions for such things, including like body stretching and taking anti-inflammatories and all types of stuff. None of it made much of a difference. Um, so at some point, I started looking for more alternative approaches, and I read Sarno's work, who pioneered the idea of mind-body disorders, and he wrote about back pain at first. And I immediately recognized it was a good fit for me, despite it not being a back pain. But like I was like checking all the boxes of the phenomenology he described for those people. And basically, once I read that book, and somehow around then I also started experimenting with meditating and just feeling into my body in a much more intimate and intentional way. And I could start to feel how like I was just like displacing the stress that I was having from a difficult and unpleasant role I was in my graduate school. I was doing like research and I felt like it was going nowhere, and I hated working in a lab. And I just by reading that book, that unlocked a certain like mental possibility that this could be a mind body disorder. And then I quickly decided to try like meditating. And so my meditation was just embodiment and sending metta, like loving kindness energy, like in my hands. And within a week, I was like 90% better. And then I was like 100% better not too long after that. So that really opened my eyes to like how important, I might have just said like mental well-being was at that time, or like the mind, body, physical, mental health are not disconnected things. Um,
I love how the body can give like these really clear messages of like this is not working and then this is working.
yeah, and then I expected the body to be a performance machine for my will and my mind's desires and goals, and
It
that wasn't the
resonates.
reality. Yeah.
Yeah.
So now it's like recognizing a more harmonious and kind of two-way feedback process between mind and body, both ways. Um, so that like got me to pay attention to like, hey, meditation can be really powerful. But I actually didn't continue meditating because I'd solved my problem. And I didn't feel like I had an immediate reason. But one of my good friends had always been like nagging me to try out his like Buddhist meditation practice. He was really into it. And at this point, I was like way more open to it from that experience. So I was like, okay, I will try this. And it just was really effective at melting stress in my body, which I knew from my episode that was like an ongoing issue for me. I had a propensity to like get stressed, operate in high stress states from like my work or school demands. So I felt like, oh, this is good medicine overall for just like well-being. But then as more and more I listened to Buddhist Dharma, the more I got enamored with their approach to like trying to describe the fundamental nature of suffering, of like being a self in the world. And I felt like it was very compelling because it had a really minimal set of kind of postulates or axioms which explained like a huge amount of downstream phenomena, especially suffering, which I got really interested in. And so I decided to like this was a year later. I decided to go on a retreat to the monastery of the teacher I had been listening to. It was called the monastery is Wat Metta, and it was in the San Diego area. And it was a Thai forest tradition Theravada Buddhist monastery. And I had a major awakening on like day 3 or 4 of that retreat, like a very large shift in consciousness that I had no context for and no expectation of, and not a lot of support in integrating because I didn't have any reference points and anyone that seemed to like be having a similar experience or could relate. Uh, so like I mean from that point on it was just like okay, like these practices really work, and they kind of it's true. They can like fundamentally transform the relationship, the sense of self, the experience of self, and that's like quite powerful and quite profound. Um,
It's interesting that you say that because I noticed that these life-changing experiences, whether it's a retreat or a training, they don't come with like an integration space afterwards. I think
yeah,
this is also an interesting idea for a community actually. In September, I was in a temporary community just for a month, and the intention was integration of two of the trainings.
yeah. I've found living in community to be conscious community to be super supportive of integrating. Because there, it's like really some people can relate to your experience, or even if they can't, they will be willing and interested to be present with it, curious about what's going on for you, and try to like, yeah, if you're really struggling, try to figure out how to support, and that's like quite valuable. Um, Sometime later, I was living in a conscious community in San Francisco Bay Area, and because people were doing different practices and having different experiences, but they'd like come back together once in a while, like try
Mm,
to like integrate what's going on with each other, and um, yeah, help us each integrate on our own path and help us kind of form more of a common reality or shared understanding of like what was possible and what types of how to like make sense of the different practices we were doing in the context of like there's just like one human system. I mean, there's individual humans, but like if you're thinking of a map of like a human system in general, there's just like one territory of humanness that's being mapped. Um, and so it's like how to make how to construct like a bigger map that is able to have space for and like make sense of the different transformational practices that exist. So I found that really helpful, like living in community and trying to build such maps together.
yeah, I love that. Like the way I experience being here is like there is a net that holds me in my daily life. And it's not very visible, it's not something that's very complicated. It just happens from being intertwined, being around each other. While when I live alone in an apartment or with roommates, but there's no intentionality with roommates, it's just like being in cubicles side by side.
Yeah.
I really miss something that holds me. It's almost like I feel dropped sometimes.
Yeah, like there is a feeling of, I think, innate support that most people experience in community, at least once you have some form of like bond with the community. And in my mind, it just taps into our ancestral like living in tribes of people and always having
Yeah.
like people around we could rely on or at least understood us, that were close to us and were we were relational with. And in the modern world of like if you live in a your own place or nuclear family, I mean the family can provide some of that also. I don't want to like discount that, but you're like living on your own, the workplace may not really provide that feeling of like support or being held. And I think a lot of people probably have no idea to the extent to which that's actually possible to have living in an intentional or conscious community. And so in a sense they like don't know what they're missing. They don't know how
Yeah.
supported they can feel and how they'll show up differently feeling that support. And it can feel more enabling to like lean into big life undertakings, um, or just like taking risks that are worthwhile.
Yeah, and I also want to be conscious of like not creating or painting a picture where it's like all pink and shiny and everything is awesome. Obviously, we also have a lot of challenges. There is solutions that need to happen. Sometimes someone is loud or taking more space, etc. But I just constantly find like commitment to living together and being in connection. This is what I personally thought.
Yeah, I think it is like that commitment is kind of like the bedrock. It's like we're
Yeah.
choosing to be here, not merely because like this is a nice environment or the rent is good or like I like my what my room looks like, but there's like a commitment to wanting to live in more intimacy with each other, more like
Yeah.
connection. Uh, yeah.
Exactly.
Without that, I don't think that. Well, I don't know. It's like possible that people might experiment like toe dip living in community without knowing, like being that conscious about whether they're a yes or not to that commitment. And they could like by experiencing others in the community, they could realize that it's good that they are a yes to it.
And I hear that you are closing the space, and I think I'm correct that you will open another space. And I'm curious, like, what are the things to keep? What are the things to pause? What are the things you will do again? And what are the things you learned from? And you're like, okay, this doesn't work.
Yeah, that's a big question. There isn't. We are gonna. I intend to keep living in community indefinitely, unless I had a really good reason not to, and currently, I don't. So we're setting up. And we have a new community in its infancy in the Bay Area in Marin County, um, and um, yeah, the lessons learned here. Um, I learned that like we founded this house with three of us, three co-founders, and they were, I'd say one of us was like quite different than the others in terms of like culture and like energy and who like they like to have in community. And we imagined up front that there could be like a harmonization or like a great fusion of like two different kind of center points of culture. And certainly there was overlap between the cultures. They weren't like far to live together, be incompatible.
Can you say
Um,
more about what were the differences in just a few keywords?
yeah, I'd say one of the founders was more into like the tantra, sex positive, um, medicine work, like kind of aspects of or flavors of conscious community and of life. And I'd say me and other co-founder were more interested in like I'd say something more like the fusion of tech with consciousness and or like the development of society like where like futurism like transhumanism where are we going as a civilization and like being involved in that and being educated in it and like kind of recruiting consciousness development like for influencing those processes like because we wanted those processes to unfold in a conscious more highly conscious way and so like those cultures are not the same. There is overlap, but they're
But they
not.
also sound like, in theory, they sound ideal to like grow together because they could
Yeah,
totally balance each other, I imagine.
yeah, they can be balancing, and I think we've all experienced relationships with people across those like different cultural center points that did feel like balancing and felt like the whole was greater than the sum of its parts. Um, but at the same time, it's like the more different cultures you're trying to house under one community, the more like potential issues, friction points, battles over who's living here, like which culture is going to get like one of their people kind of as their next housemate, um, and also just like what does it feel like in the fabric of of the life in the house? Like, what does it feel like energetically? What type of is the house highly structured? Is it more like flowy? Like these type of things start to become they can become points of conflict or points of non-coherence where you might just have like one group doing one thing, another doing another, and you're kind of at some points you're kind of like, why are we living under the same roof? Because it feels like your way of being is kind of like more like in the way of my way of being, or creating, fostering more of my culture. And this actually, it's not the case that there's no cross pollination or no synergy. It's just that, there's trade offs. Um,
Yeah, I almost want to say it's like, how can we have diversity that is coherent, and does it become a monoculture or not?
yeah, I think that's a really important question that I actually don't hear discussed super explicitly, although it's discussed implicitly in many things like house values, who's living here. Like it's always underpinning those discussions. But I think it's like a worthwhile thing in planning a community house to discuss, get clear up front. It's like, what types of diversity do we want to house under this roof, and like weave together in a fabric of community, and what types of elements that bring coherence, or like um, shared reality, shared way of being, do we want to like bring together? So that would be more the monoculture. Um, I don't really like the word monoculture because it somehow, I think it has like a negative slant on it. But if you don't if you don't like curate the culture um, to embody, or value, or bring certain pillars that you're trying to foster, then it's just that you you probably are not going to have as much coherence, not going to have as much bonding, and not going to have as much fostering of those particular things as you might want if you were to be like more intentional about it. So I think like, I'll just use this is kind of abstract, we've been talking, so let's be more concrete. It's like for me, it was like in this house, I wanted people living here to be deeply engaged in their own consciousness development. So like along like maybe the three lines I mentioned. I wanted them to have some interest or activity about like bringing that into the world, and I wanted there to be a high value. So these are the elements that I'm trying to collect around. So like basically a high interest in personally doing practices, some interest in opening the house to like outsiders, to have them come in to join us. Um, and then things that are more like wanting diversity, well, I think having exploring a diverse array of consciousness development practices is very worthwhile. So it's like wanting more diverse stuff, and like sex positive tantra stuff is not where I come from. That's not like my background, but I was totally keen to like get exposed to more of it, to try out some of those practices and that lifestyle. So I was wanting, or at least open to some degree of that cross pollination. Um, but other things like, I mean, anything you don't kind of prioritize as a cultural pillar, like, well, you may not end up like getting that in the community. So you just want to be like really conscious about like what values you want the culture to be coherent or in agreement on, and like which ones it's like diversity is favored. Uh,
So what I hear is basically stand for what you.
I'd say first get clear internally, like what values you want in the community you're living in, and then yeah, and then like make it explicit that like this community is like um, fostering this way of living, or this kind of this culture. Really, I think it's a lot about culture. Communities could also have a purpose, kind of a mission in the world. I specifically did not want this community to have a mission in the world. That feels
Oh,
a little too much like a startup, or like a workspace to me.
interesting.
And I wanted it to be. I wanted missions in the world could be emergent and organic within the community, but I didn't want anyone living here to feel pressure to like be engaged in a coherent mission in the world with like the whole community in some sense. Um,
I want to come back to the question: what would you do differently, and what would you do the same?
yeah, that was the question. Got a little elsewhere. Uh, So what would I do differently? I think I would not try to have like diverse founders that are wanting different center points of the culture, like that far apart as we had here, like being partners to co-create a community. Because in our case, that didn't work well. That's my kind of reflective evaluation. And a lot of times it felt like there was headbutting just in the way of each other, and there was conflict about who was living here, who wouldn't be living here. Um, so I would want more coherence in that dimension, more monoculture, um, and uh, what I would do similarly. I think a lot of things went right here. Like by and large, I think we got great people living here. So like friends of friends who are on their personal consciousness path. Like that is kind of like the bedrock. Being on your consciousness path, kind of the bedrock thing, and then friends of friends is kind of like a good initial filter for getting compatible people together. Um, I mean, what else has gone right is like when a house gets to this size. So we've been various sizes. I guess we've been as little as maybe like 6, and as big as like 12 or so. And at the upper ends, I say like 8 or above, it starts to get important to have some degrees of like more organization in the house, like who's doing which chores or division of labor. Like even someone, we have someone doing shopping for the house regularly. We have a house like meal plan where you can just buy in, and those are great. Um, it's not obvious to me that like a smaller house on net would want or benefit from systems like that. Uh, but for bigger houses, super important, I think. Um,
Yes, and then also structures like a house meeting, a sharing
yeah,
circle, like
coming
these.
together.
Yeah.
I feel like any community house should be coming together at least like once a week, to the extent, and it should be a high priority for people to come together on that meeting. Um, there's a bit of a sometimes a bit of a feeling of competition between like, okay, if you're just coming together once a week, like are you just going to be doing like house meeting to like crunch through the essentials of like running the house? Are you also going to have like a social time, like a dinner or like art shares where you like are on Monday? So we've decided to like now we've split that up into 2 different nights, 2 different events. One is like the sharing circle we do on Mondays, and the other is the house meeting we do on Tuesdays. um, yeah, I think that's been working okay for us. In some instances, trying to name 2 nights a week for high priority events for people to be at could be challenging, depending on how social outside the house people are. So, like combining those into like a dinner and then a house meeting or something can
Yeah,
also
I
be
think it's
possible.
a good system. Maybe just add like a bigger process for conflict resolution, maybe once a month, and then it can always be counted. But I feel like just one sharing circle sometimes does good. Um, there's a question that came to mind when you were saying recruiting friends and friends of friends worked. I was wondering what's your stand on inclusivity? Because I see like a lot of these projects wanting to go into this radical inclusivity. Especially, I come from the authentic relating communities, and there is like really, really important. And yeah, it's really a question of mine because it can't always work. I feel like it's a
Yeah.
fairy tale sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds nice, especially in our modern cultural backdrop of like green meme to be like radically inclusive. Um, but I mean, I think I can convince anybody that there's certain instances where their inclusivity, they would put a boundary on it because it would like in some way threaten or it'd be in conflict with what they wanted the house to be about. I mean, just for an example, like I don't know that I would want to have a housemate whom we shared no languages in common, whom I couldn't communicate with. I feel like that would be problematic just for like connection and for day-to-day operational life. And so it's not that I'm like want to discriminate against people who don't speak English. It's more just like a pragmatic life need. Um, Another example that often comes up is the community kind of inclusive of children? Like if a housemate wants to join with young children, um, is the community welcoming of that? And I think that's a pretty serious question because like just a community with children is a very different experience, and some people may feel it's like really they want that, they want to be like kind of a surrogate auntie or uncle for children, and other people may not. They may be like, the noise, the chaos, the responsibility, the need to keep the house more safe, like not have accident prone areas, is just like too much responsibility and they don't want to take that on. And I think that's, those are kind of easy examples on where one might draw a boundary on inclusivity. But there's also just examples of like, again, going back to like seeding the culture with the way in the way you want, like is but by being totally like maximally inclusive, you're actually in the way. That's almost like a obstruction to curating a very intentional, coherent culture. Um, so it'd be like get clear on which elements are like must-haves or highly important for the culture, and then it could be the case that a must-have for the culture is like diversity of gender in the culture. So that would be then, be like we all want that, so we're gonna like try to create that. It could be like diversity of spiritual practice or of development practice is highly desired. Um, but I think we all have kind of like blind spots in two senses. Like one is like a type of diversity that like abstractly we assume would be good, but we haven't actually experienced living with that diversity, and there actually in reality are challenges that would arise that would be problematic that we wouldn't like. And the other blind spot would be like well, kind of the converse, like thinking that, oh, I only want people here who are like futurists, because like part of me thinks that, but then I'm like, well, actually, if I check in with relationally who I've had the most juicy or fruitful connections or relationships with, it's not only with futurists, and I've valued what's come of those relationships. So there's like a bit of a bias or a blind spot there to like, because a lot of times what catalyzes us the most is actually something in a blind spot that we wouldn't be able to abstractly like say, oh, like this type of housemate would really open me up in this dimension. Because
Yeah.
if it's blind, we don't know. We don't even know about it. We don't know what it would be.
Yeah, and this is the question that comes to me is how can people find you, or how much do you make yourself visible out there so that you can attract a big diversity of people, and how much do you stay in this comfort zone of, well, it works for us, like
Yeah.
friends and friends of friends and friends of friends of friends, so why would
Yeah.
we do more? And typically I'm asking this because I've been willing to live in a community for a long time, and if it wasn't for my partner Axios, who knew someone here, I would never be here. But then at the same time, this place works really well for me. And I think there are some people who are creating like databases of communities because it's just like such a mystery. And what I want to do with this video is encourage people to reach out more to communities or to create some. So yeah, this is a big question in my mind, like how much do you make yourself visible?
Yeah. I don't think we've made ourselves extremely publicly visible. Actually, I mean, we do have like an Instagram account, but we aren't posted on like community sites I'm aware of where you can just kind of like apply. Anyone could apply online through like a website to get a spot.
And that's so
Um,
much work, so it's also
yeah,
comprehensible.
like if this house had like more of a financial need to be like sustainable in the sense of like without my support, I think we would have had more of a need to pursue those avenues to get more housemates. But we've been kind of content to just like be willing to. I've been content to eat some financial costs in order to have like higher trust with like who's here through the friends of friends kind of filter, and also just it's been we've had a decent success filling the house. It hasn't always been as full as I would like, but it hasn't been like super sparse either. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think it's like if you
In
want,
your
if you
next community, would you do the same? Like
yeah,
recruit
even more
friends of
so because the
friends?
next community in San Francisco Bay, I already have a deep network, and it's already so much higher percent of the people in my network are interested in living in community than is the case locally here in Puerto Rico. So it's like way easier to just do like a friends of friends type filter or type like funnel to catch new housemates. Um, so, but yeah, I mean, if you really want to attract like type of diversity of like global nomads or travelers, or you just need more housemates, then that's like a totally good strategy to pursue. Yeah.
So we're almost coming to the end, and I just want to question for the future, how do you envision the impact of, and this is a very broad question to reply about it, on the environment, just like on the level of connection.
Yeah. Um, I've always loved living in community, and once I got into consciousness work, it was obvious to me that should go together. Like I would want to live in a conscious community. Um, Actually, I shouldn't say it wasn't obvious to me because it wasn't obvious to me until I knew that it was possible, knew that it was happening. Then it became obvious to me. Um, but I just imagine that more and more people are going to discover that it's possible. It's a thing that's happening in the world, and that they could get involved. They could live in a conscious community, and that it's like very rewarding. It's very worthwhile, richening of their life and their development as a human to do so. So my prediction is it will become a more prominent way of living, um, and that uh, it will foster a type of future which I want to see, which is one where human development consciousness work is held in higher esteem culturally, held as like a basic, maybe the most important basic educational thread of our children as they grow up. It's like really the crux, the center point of human development. And I hope that the culture kind of moves in that direction towards making that more important and making it more a default part of child education. Um, but I also think there's something deeply balancing about living in conscious community. At least it's possible when the community is going well, and that uh, for that there's a way in which like that balance can be brought into people's work, people's creation, and like they can create from a more holistic way because they are experiencing more wholeness because of the enrichment of their life and their consciousness from living in conscious community. So it's kind of like a vague type thing that I don't exactly know how to like quantify or be really precise about, but it just seems like roughly true to me. So I hope that that proves to be the case. But I would just also add that's like when I look around at the world, I see a lot of loneliness and a lot of mental, psychological suffering.
Yeah.
And I think just living in any community, conscious or not, with people that love and care about you, um, or at least that you have real relationships, like
Yes.
would actually be hugely healing to the fabric of society. And so I hope it becomes more of a trend because I see it as the medicine for that issue.
I really a lot. I really enjoyed this conversation.
You're welcome. It was super fun. Thanks for interviewing me and setting it up.
Recording stopped.
We did it.
Yeah.